Bonsoir à tous. Merci d'être venus si nombreux à cette masterclass de Gus Van Sant. C'est un peu spécial pour nous parce qu'il est arrivé dimanche et ça fait 5 jours qu'on a le grand privilège de travailler avec lui à la Cinémathèque. Donc juste un mot pour exprimer notre gratitude pour sa générosité, sa disponibilité. Il a vraiment vécu ici avec nous depuis dimanche dernier. Vous allez donc assister à sa masterclass qui sera animée par Mathieu Orléans, qui est le commissaire de l'exposition Icône, que vous pouvez voir au 5e étage. Et le dernier mot, et avant de passer la parole à Mathieu, c'est pour vous dire qu'après la masterclass, Gus Van Sant sera à la librairie de la Cinémathèque, où donc il dédicacera le catalogue de l'exposition qui est édité chez Actes Sud. Mathieu, tu vas animer cette masterclass, donc à toi.
Alors bonsoir, quelques petits mots avant de lancer cette masterclass. Juste pour vous dire qu'évidemment c'était un grand bonheur de travailler pour la Cinémathèque avec Gus Van Sant pendant 1 an et demi, 2 ans, et qu'on a eu de longues et belles discussions sur le cinéma à propos de ses films, et aussi du rapport de ses films avec d'autres pratiques artistiques, qui est un peu l'enjeu de l'exposition, et que ces belles discussions qu'on a eues en privé, c'est vrai que c'est très agréable de se dire qu'on pourra les avoir ici en public. Alors évidemment sur 1h15, 1h30, on ne pourra peut-être pas tout dire, et évidemment là le catalogue est un prolongement naturel de cette discussion, mais je trouve que c'est très agréable de pouvoir le partager avec le public, cette conversation qu'on a eue à propos de la fabrication des films, de ses influences, de ses premières années de formation. Là on va peut-être se concentrer un petit peu sur le cinéma, comme l'indique le titre, une masterclass du cinéaste Gus Van Sant. On ne pourra certainement pas tout aborder en 1h15, 1h30, mais je vous invite évidemment à venir acheter le livre et à voir l'exposition qui développe un peu plus, qu'on le fera peut-être ce soir, le rapport aux arts plastiques, qui est très central dans mon propos. Comme on est dans une salle de cinéma, ça me semblait assez naturel de commencer par un film. Les mots viendront après et on aura tout le temps de parler et aussi de répondre à quelques-unes de vos questions, peut-être 3-4 comme ça, sachant qu'il faut qu'on parte vers un peu avant 8h30. Mais c'est vrai que j'avais envie de partager un extrait de film. Alors, c'est peut-être un film que vous avez vu, mais c'est bien de pouvoir le repartager ensemble. C'est un extrait de Elephant, 2003, Palme d'Or, 2 plans séquences magnifiques qui peuvent comme ça un petit peu lancer la discussion. On sait à quel point c'est un film matriciel, important dans sa carrière, et donc voilà, j'avais envie qu'on partage aussi ensemble des images dans cette belle salle de cinéma. Donc on regarde ces 5 minutes d'extrait et on commencera ensuite à parler. Voilà.
Jawohl. How do you think?
That good, huh? That good? That's all right. You know what happens. So how's Sarah doing? Is everything okay with her? There's
Yeah. Well, how's school for you?
it's about as good as it could be.
Pete.
Thank you. Thanks. Alors voilà, nous allons. J'avais envie de commencer effectivement sur Elephant, non seulement parce que c'est un film extrêmement connu qu'on peut partager tous ensemble sans en avoir forcément à raconter l'histoire, mais aussi parce que c'est un film qui est, et cet extrait le montre bien, pour le spectateur assez paradoxal. Il est à la fois extrêmement simple, extrêmement épuré, puis en même temps extrêmement complexe sur les jeux de regard, les ralentis, les effets de lumière, le travail sur la musique. Donc c'est vrai que c'était un peu un emblème, je trouve, de votre cinéma, quelque part, de cette tension entre extrême simplicité, émotion, et en même temps une extrême sophistication. Comme je l'ai dit au début, il y a 2 plans séquences, peut-être ça peut être la première question, ça peut être le point de départ. D'où est venue cette idée si importante dans le film, qui à la fois ce traitement de l'espace et du temps, de transformer ce film en une succession de plans séquences?
The origins of the film were kind of came from Jerry, which was the previous film, where I think that it was a case where we were trying to make a film where there was no screenplay, and we in Jerry, and we started by writing, sort of like having a vague outline. And it was a time where I thought I was making the film with Matt Damon and Casey Affleck, and it was a story that came from Boston. It was about 2 guys who get lost in the wilderness, but they always sort of were close to the road somehow in the original story. And I thought this story was going to yield like a lot of dialogue and a lot of sort of kind of John Cassavetes like activity, between the characters. And so I was reading John Cassavetes' books and reading about him and preparing for something that was going to be quite like active. And by the time we got, a lot of things happened along the way. We ended up starting to shoot the film in Argentina to sort of avoid an actor's strike. And we ended up like in the middle of like nowhere in northern Argentina, in an area where there were 2 giant parks where we were going to have the characters like venture in. And as we worked on the project, there was less and less sort of growing of like this kind of the thing that was in my mind, which was this repartee between the 2 characters. Everybody was quite silent, and there was some things that we'd worked out, like events that had happened in the planning of it, where there was some dialogue, but it was so austere that I was trying to, like, as the director, kind of venture forward without a script, and try to like make the film kind of make sense to me. And I had just seen Bela Tarr's Satan Tango, which was very austere, which kind of treated dialogue as an ancillary thing within the story rather than the dialogue leading the story or leading you into the story. So we're working with Matt and Casey. I was explaining to them the way I was envisioning it and the way the film was taking shape, and they kind of played into that, and we made this very austere movie about two guys getting lost in the wilderness. And so, having finished Jerry and showing it around, the director of photography, Harris Savitas, and I, who had sort of perfected what the look of the film was going to be, and also the actors, like sort of working with no script, which entailed a lot of kind of strange moments and kind of slapstick problems that arose. I think during this time there was a script being written for Elephant by J.T. Leroy, who was turned into a fake name. I was an author that I thought I knew, and J.T. was hired to write the screenplay for Elephant, which had been suggested to Colin Callender as a story about the Columbine massacre and the sort of psychological looking into the event on a TV program. We'd sold it to, or sold the idea at least to HBO. It was Colin that coined it Elephant, because he had worked at the BBC when Alan Clark and Danny Boyle made a film called Elephant, which was commenting on violence in England during 1989. And so there was the screenplay, and we'd finished Elephant. I remember being at the Sundance Film Festival with Jerry and reading the screenplay and deciding that I wasn't sure I wanted to kind of like get involved in like what I was reading. I wanted to do something different, like we had done on Jerry. So we had a meeting at HBO. I was still interested in the idea of this this story about Columbine, but having had like a friend write the screenplay and not really liking it, I thought maybe what I should do is just kind of bail out of the project. And I went into a meeting with the producer of the project, Diane Keaton, who had brought me to Colin Callender. I went with her to this meeting with Colin and the vice president at HBO Films, and started to tell them that I wanted to make a film with no screenplay. I was planning on making it black and white. It was going to be with unknown actors and all these different reasons that I thought that they probably wouldn't want to do the film, as a way to kind of like cancel the film. And having Diane there was humorous, because she has this way about her in real life that makes you feel like you're in Annie Hall or a Woody Allen movie. And so here I was trying to think of all these reasons to make Colin not want to do the movie, and each time I said something, he responded very favorably, like, "That's brilliant, no screenplay, brilliant." And I was like, black and white, and he was like, "I think that's brilliant." And I was like, "No, the actors will be non-actors." And he thought the whole thing was just brilliant, and I couldn't talk him out of it. So I thought, well, if he really wants to do all these things, then I guess I'm in, because these are the things I wanted. I wanted to continue what we had done on Jerry, because we were sort of up to speed and we wanted to just keep going. So they allowed us. The first step was to sort of see if we could find actors that we liked, and we did. And then we kept going. I never really answered the question, but do you want me to answer it?
Non, peut-être, c'est vrai que c'est, en tout cas, j'allais venir après à Jerry, parce qu'évidemment, il y a des liens entre les deux films. D'ailleurs, la critique française a souvent lié les deux films, parlé de trilogie de la mort en y ajoutant ensuite Last Days. Alors Jerry, donc, comme l'a expliqué Gus, a été tourné avant, même si en France, il a été diffusé plutôt après. Donc les gens ont découvert Elephant avant de découvrir Jerry, mais c'est vrai que les films partagent beaucoup de choses en commun. La grande différence quand même, et j'étais curieux de savoir, ça a aussi une influence sur la question du plan séquence, du travail, de la répétition, c'est que dans Jerry, c'est deux acteurs professionnels, Casey Affleck et Matt Damon, qui avaient tout un bagage avec eux et avec vous aussi, parce que Matt Damon avait déjà joué dans Will Hunting. Par contre, dans Elephant, c'était des acteurs non professionnels. Comment est-ce qu'on travaille avec des acteurs non professionnels, même de manière assez simple? On a envie de savoir, est-ce qu'il y a beaucoup de répétitions? Est-ce qu'il y a beaucoup de prises? Est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler un petit peu de ce travail particulier?
Yeah, I mean, it started right with this suggestion of using non-actors. I think the first step for us, with just to sort of play ball with Colin, was first to show him Jerry, because I wasn't sure he really understood what we were up to. So we showed him that film. There was a great casting person from LA that we had helping us that had done a lot of improv. She was used to working with kids and teaching improv. So she came up and we had open casting calls in Portland to see if we could find high school students. And it kind of, to my surprise, like everybody showed up. Like all the high school students, I think, looked at it as an opportunity and an activity for them to do, which I kind of forgot that the high school students are often looking for an activity because half of them can't drive anywhere anyway. There's like a lot of reasons to have something like that, to do. So everybody showed up, like the kids that looked like they worked at the library, the kids that looked like they were the star football players, the pretty pretty girls which showed up, the kind of possibly crazy looking kids that could play the actual killers. Everyone showed up, and it was very uniform. There weren't one more of a type than others. So the next step was to kind of find out whether they could act, and not really knowing if we're pulling people out of life like that. But they were with Mally, who was the casting director, Mally Finn. She had sessions, and pretty much like 50% of the kids were like pretty brilliant actors. And I guess also I was supposing they were young enough that maybe they weren't that far from just pretending to do something as maybe like 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds. So so we found sort of a lot of brilliant kind of improv artists. They could actually make stuff up or go with the flow. There was a sort of outline that was made, and I think maybe the intention to shoot these very long shots wasn't really it wasn't sealed yet. Like we didn't know whether we were going to do that. We were preparing for something like that. We very much wanted to like continue from Jerry onward, but we started to we also were kind of like thinking up like what to do with all the actors. They were improvising. We showed them to HBO. Everybody was happy, and then I started to write a scenario wherein it started to become about a number of hours during the day, starting in the morning and going into the afternoon of a school day, with one flashback to the day before as a sort of tableau. And I remember things like the girls that walked into the cafeteria. They were two best friends that had, during the auditions, they had said a lot of the things that they ended up saying in the film. A lot of times I was just guiding them into things that they had already rehearsed or said in the audition. and they kind of like just would go on their own automatically. All the kids, there wasn't really anything they could do wrong. I kind of instilled that hope in them, or that idea that, you know, if they messed up, it wasn't going to be a problem. So they sort of were, all the kids that were in there, they were sort of on automatic pilot. They were doing whatever they wanted as far as what they were saying. The camera also was picking up on the idea that, or we as filmmakers, that what they said also was sort of not the point of what we were doing. What they said should just be what they would say in their normal day. We weren't using the dialogue to kind of impart the story, so they could say whatever they could talk about or do whatever they wanted verbally. I think we did sort of want them to stop on a certain mark and turn around and walk the other direction, but it was very open.
Ce qui est frappant aussi dans vos films en général et dans celui-là en particulier, c'est le rapport aux faits divers, le rapport à une histoire réelle, le rapport à des événements qui ont préexisté. Évidemment dans ce film le massacre de Columbine, mais aussi, on en a parlé hier, Drugstruck Cowboy, qui est basé sur un texte autobiographique de James Fogle, Prêt à tout également, avec le fait divers sur lequel le film est basé, Les derniers jours de Kurt Cobain. Enfin voilà, ça c'est quelque chose qui évidemment est frappant, ce rapport au réel, à la réalité, à venir chercher quelque chose du mystère du monde, même si évidemment tout ça est transformé par la fiction. Je me demandais sur ce film en particulier, ça c'est la continuité un peu de ce que j'ai posé, si les acteurs du coup, ça c'est jeunes, acteurs non professionnels, vous posez des questions un peu d'ordre éthique sur la question du massacre. Voilà, c'est pas anodin là, tout ce qu'on a dit, c'est comme un film sur quelque chose qui a été très violent. Quel était les types de discussions que vous pouviez avoir sur ce crime de masse?
Yeah, I think one of the original things we did during the casting was ask them about violence in school, different types of difficulties and hardships and or violence or abuse, and so there were lots of discussions beforehand. Not really. It was more like during the second casting session when we started deciding of certain groups of people playing parts. We would have discussions, partly because I was learning from them. You know, they were the ones in high school. I wasn't. The adults weren't either. And this is something that happened in high school. So to me, the kids knew a lot about it, and the adults pretended like they were the ones that knew about what had happened. But it was actually the kids themselves that knew what had happened, which became, you know, kind of clear as we were talking to them. So they lived it every day. They went to high school every day. We didn't. The teachers did too, but you know, it was the children in the high school that really had the opinions, and they could tell us, you know, what they were feeling, or what one feels in a situation that they were in. When we went to Cannes with the film, I wanted to bring as many kids as we could. And that guy, the head PR guy at HBO, said, why? And I said, because, you know, they can speak about, you know, violence in high schools. And he would say, well, what are they going to say? I mean, they can't say anything. They're kids. And, like, people just didn't seem to understand. Like, they were the ones that sort of could speak about it legitimately. So they were kind of already inside of a world where, you know, where we were sort of trying to like view it, you know, and they could tell us.
Alors le film pour autant n'est pas violent au sens où il est plutôt poétique, comme un puzzle. Au niveau narratif, on est parfois un peu perdu. C'est aussi une des manières de peut-être de violenter la fiction, la narration. Ça aussi, c'est quelque chose qui est quelque chose de récurrent, comme un motif structurant de vos films. On a parlé tout à l'heure du rapport aux faits divers, mais c'est vrai que ça me frappe à chaque fois que je vois les films, de Malanoche à Paranoid Park, en passant par Prêt à tout. C'est ce mélange de temporalité, les flashbacks, le fait que la narration ne suive pas toujours un ordre évident, intuitif, et qui oblige parfois, avec plaisir d'ailleurs, à revoir les films pour essayer de mieux les comprendre. Et même dans Elephant, aussi simple soit-il, il y a ce trouble permanent qui amène le spectateur à vouloir revoir le film. Alors ça, je me demandais, voilà, est-ce que c'est quelque chose dont vous avez conscience dès le début, ou c'est quelque chose qui vient vraiment au montage? Est-ce qu'il y a une envie comme ça consciente de perturber un petit peu le spectateur et de l'amener à revoir le film, de le décontenancer un petit peu? Comment est-ce que ça se passe au niveau du travail?
I think that each film is different, so that I personally don't see a uniform, treatment to the dramatic ideas, or they come from many different sources. The stories, sometimes they're screenplays by other people. I mean, in the case of, I think, Jerry, Elephant, and Last Days, there were mysteries in each story, mysteries that were on a lot of people's minds. But both Elephant and Last Days had been very big news stories, and the public knew, had gone over a lot of the ideas within the story. And what I was trying to do in both of those films was sort of, in Elephant, I guess, suggest lightly the kind of usual suspects, or the usual ideas of like why a tragedy like that could happen or did happen, and allow the audience to come up with different, as they're watching, the sort of small suggestions would get the audience thinking about the subject that they had already thought about before, and have their own answers. Because there were so many different answers, I didn't want to come up with, just a few answers on my own and stress those to the audience. I knew that the audience had a million answers, and that I wanted to help them like kind of ruminate through those answers. With Last Days, it was a little different. I was more suggesting that the mysterious, like, missing days of Kurt Cobain were probably relatively uneventful. It was a little different, but it was kind of also going through those uneventful days that kind of also gets the audience like thinking about his death. So those two films were very oblique in their narrative sort of intentions, and hopefully effective. In some cases, just went right past the audience, and in some cases, it was like very well received as a strategy. But the other films like To Die For, or pretty much all the other films, have a much stronger narrative, like concept, dramatic concept.
Un autre point commun entre Last Days et Elephant Jerry, c'est le travail avec Harris Avides. J'aurais aimé savoir comment vous pouviez définir votre relation, comment vous prépariez les films. Je sais que parfois il vous arrivait de voir d'autres films ensemble. Comment cette collaboration s'étayait à chaque fois. Je crois savoir que sur Elephant, c'est peut-être intéressant, vous avez aussi vraiment travaillé sur un type de pellicule très particulier, assez rare, qui donne une chromie qui a l'air de venir d'une autre temporalité, peut-être pas comme si c'était pas un film, bizarrement, alors qu'il parle de l'actualité, qui vient pas de son présent, de son époque. Est-ce que vous pouvez un petit peu parler de Savides, qui est un grand chef opérateur avec qui vous avez fait beaucoup de films?
Harris and I, he died a few years from a brain tumor a few years ago. His last film was Bling Ring. With he was helped by his old assistant to do it, but I met him in '96 on a commercial. He was a very big guy. He was New Yorker. His last name was a Greek name, so he was like sort of a big Greek guy, and he talked sort of like the Godfather. He was kind of a high raspy voice, and he was very kind. And I met him through the art director on a commercial that for whatever reason, we were looking for a DP. I guess the DPs that I knew were working. And my friend Ken Woodard, who was the art director, said that he had worked with Harris in Prague on this Levi's commercial and he showed me the commercial. It looked really great. And he was sort of stressing how committed Harris was, that even though he was very large, he forced himself in the back seat of this very small vehicle to get just the shot he wanted. And he was sort of selling Harris to me. And then he said, oh, and also he shot all of Madonna's videos, and Madonna won't work without him. And I was like, oh, really? Madonna, who I assumed was pretty stringent and intelligent, that I thought he must be pretty good. So I hired him because of Madonna, I think. So we met on that commercial, but then whenever I had a project, I tried to get Harris to shoot. I remember the next project was Good Will Hunting, and he was afraid of having to use like a Canadian crew, a crew that he didn't know. And so he didn't do that one. It was done by Jean-Yves Escoffier, who was from Paris. But the subsequent films, like eventually we worked together on Finding Forrester and Jerry right after Finding Forrester. And the way we worked together was partly Harris was used to doing a lot of commercials and music videos. They made him, helped him pay for his house in New York. They helped him make good money, and he was sort of afraid of getting stuck on a movie for too long. Like a movie often is 10 weeks of being with the same people every day. So a commercial or a music video was only usually a week long. And that was, if things were going well or good or poorly, at least he was only going to be on it for 10 days. And because of that, he did a lot of experimentation. He knew a lot about, all the cameras and all the film stocks and video and, different gauges of film, 16 millimeter or 8 millimeter. And he did a lot of experimentation as well. He worked with David Fincher in a few films. He's attributed to the kind of jumpy credits in David Fincher's Seven, of having like the credits sort of like look like they get caught in the gate of the film. But together I think we always started out by realizing that we could do whatever we wanted to do. We could use any kind of camera. We could use lights, a lot of lights or no lights. We always had this sort of very wide group of choices, and through a process of elimination and maybe sometimes testing, we always ended up back at like 35 millimeter film with some. The new thing would probably be the film stock usually, and the film stock that you're talking about on Elephant. I only used on Elephant, and it was a very low contrast stock, and its benefit was that it, with no lighting and the proper printing, if you printed it on very contrasty stock, it could see, it could hold its latitude. So very, very bright things still had detail, and very, very dark things had detail. And in Elephant is virtually no lighting going on, and sometimes the characters walk into dark spaces and you can still see inside those spaces. And he, I think Harris was the person that suggested the slow motion in Elephant that sort of shows up every now and then. And through my kind of like wondering why we need so much lighting, through this sort of like, talking about it with Harris, Jerry and Elephant and Last Days. In the case of Jerry and Last Days, we aren't using any lights at all. The lights that exist are either sometimes practicals, or if it's at night outside, there'll be like either light coming from the sky or sometimes a street light. But he was able to accommodate a shoot that used no lights. I mean, he didn't have lights. I also was trying to make, on those films, a very small crew. And, Harris, being one of the main crew members and building the crew, was able to help and, minimize the crew. He also came up with the idea of where we had shot Jerry and Elephant with very long moving shots. When it came to Last Days, we were starting with moving shots and some sort of still shots mixed in. But when we got into the house, this main mansion where the lead character lives, it was Harris that had recently seen Jean Dielman by Chantal Ackerman. And I had seen it too. It was one of our guides when we were looking into Jerry. But he brought it up again because now we were in a house. And it was his idea to use these fixed positions in each room for the camera to be, instead of using a moving camera through the house. And also, I think, we're asking, how do you work with your DP? For me, and I think the filmmakers that are here, it's very common for the director to have the DP as his main, collaborator. I think it's probably true that the other directors have other collaborators that they're kind of using as a sounding board during the making of a film. The easiest one is the DP, because he's looking through the camera and he sees even more than you see. And so I would very often check with Harris, if he liked something, a performance, or whether he thought he saw the right thing through the camera. I was always checking with him first. So at the end of a take, usually my eyes would just go directly to Harris, and he would either go or he'd go subtly, of course. And I have all these dreams about him, sort of not liking the shot, sort of bad dreams where he's like, Harris, it's not working, is it? And he would go, no, it's not, because it's kind of a high voice. And it was sort of it's sort of the nightmare that happens sometimes on the set when you're not really getting the idea. But he was capable of being a director, and many DPs are capable of being directors, but for some reason they don't like that extra layer of I guess bullshit, it would be called, between the director and the actor, because the director's often kind of lying to the actor about things because they need the actor to sort of be in a certain place and understand in a certain way, but they can't literally tell them what's going on because it might be upsetting or whatever. So Harris didn't he witnessed it all day long because he was standing next to you while you were talking to the actor. But he just couldn't face that sort of level of, I guess, fibbing or whatever you're doing when you're speaking to your actors.
J'aimerais bien qu'on aborde en faisant un petit flashback un autre type de complicité. Là justement ça a pu, disons, aller dans cette direction, ce que vous me dites. Là, ça me fait penser à ce dont on a parlé un petit peu tous les deux et qui m'avait beaucoup intéressé quand on s'était vu à Portland. C'était autour de la complicité un peu particulière avec River Phoenix. Donc, on fait un bond dans le temps bien avant Elephant, parce que vous avez tourné ensemble ce magnifique film à Own Private Idaho. Et j'ai découvert en parlant qu'effectivement, il y avait eu un rapport différent peut-être avec d'autres comédiens, et que justement il y avait eu une sorte de collaboration. Là on parle du regard de sa vitesse sur les plans, de son goût, de sa manière de pouvoir dire ce qui lui plaisait ou pas, et que River Phoenix à sa manière aussi avait pu proposer des choses, nourrir son personnage, inventer des scènes, proposer un nouvel axe de son personnage. Et ça je trouve que c'est intéressant de peut-être pouvoir en parler parce que les gens ne le savent pas beaucoup, et évidemment c'est un acteur qui est très aimé ici aussi.
Like the relationship with River.
Et aussi le fait qu'il ait apporté des choses à son personnage dans Idaho, qu'il est un peu comme un collaborateur, comme un chef opérateur, et amener des propositions et transformer son personnage, et voilà, et proposer quelque chose comme un pas de côté par rapport à ce qui était prévu.
I mean, he was a really good friend. He was the type of person that, at least for me, I don't think this was a uniform of all of his relationships with his directors, but he, I think we just agreed, with about what we were supposed to be doing or what we were trying to do, and we liked talking about it. We liked, sort of talking about what his character was up to. He was also really independent. So I remember I gave him a book by John Reishi about street hustlers as a sort of reference book. And I gave the same book to Keanu Reeves. I can't remember if it was Sexual Outlaw or one of the John Reishi books. Maybe it was City of Night. So between the two of them, I think River read like the first page and like was done with it. Keanu read the book and then he bought like all of John Reishi's other books and read all of them. So between the two of them, like that was the academic side. But then River on his own, he felt like he already knew what was going on. Where Keanu might have wanted literal information, River wanted to make it up. He wanted to invent it. He felt he already knew. I also introduced him to a few street hustlers, both he and Keanu, and River kind of like didn't want to listen to them because he already had formulated what his character is up to, what he does, how he thinks, and he didn't need to have somebody tell him. Whereas Keanu, like I think, was more interested in more information. Keanu's character also was like Shakespearean. He was really playing Prince Hal, which didn't have an equivalent in modern society in America. So Keanu kind of had a harder job. River was playing somebody that was based on a real person in Portland that he could meet and talk to. But it was interesting how he wanted to be independent of some of the things that I had in mind. He wanted to be independent of my own, like pushing him in a direction. His costume, often his pants were too short, like way too short. And I thought they made him look bad. And so I would say, "Are you sure you want to wear these pants?" And he was like, "Absolutely." Like, and you could tell he was going to fight you over it. You're like, okay. And I knew he had something he loved about, and my point of view was probably square anyway, like according to him. Yeah, I think that he really liked to be trusted with ideas, and it sort of got him interested. He was part of the filmmaking, and I also thought his ideas were good. So like between the two of us, it was maybe great, maybe a great combo because I guess we trusted each other, and I'm not sure why. It just was the way it was. We did a scene with his his brother in the film early. His brother was played by James Russo, and it was a scene where River has a fight with his brother, and a scene where he could conceivably cry. He was famous for a scene in Stand By Me and also other movies where he cried, and it was always like sort of a pinnacle moment in those films. And he loved My Own Private Idaho enough to really take ownership of like his role and really want to have like the sort of signature like River Phoenix crying moment. I imagined, I never asked him about this, but after shooting with the brother, somehow it didn't happen. The moment didn't happen. And he asked me whether I could take the campfire scene that was supposed to happen between him and Keanu and move it to the very end of the shoot. And I said, yeah, we can do that. And I was suspicious that he wanted to make that like the big scene. So he also, like, while we were filming the film and while he was waiting to shoot the campfire scene, which in the end did become the big scene. started rewriting the scene, and he would show me like pages written on torn pieces of paper that were smudged and kind of like worked over, that he and a friend of his and one of my friends were together kind of reworking the scene, and he wanted to know if that was okay, and I just kept saying yes, 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 because I knew we could always go back to the original dialogue if it wasn't working out, but I kept saying yes to him because I assumed he was trying to make this big moment in the movie. And so the day of the shoot, he said, okay, so I want to just do the scene once for the wide camera and once for the medium camera and once for the close-ups. And there'll just be one take. So like I said, okay, you know, that's I think a good idea. I knew also we could probably do more takes if we needed to. But he sort of designed this whole thing around the campfire scene, which was kind of remarkable.
Il y a aussi une grande complicité, on le voit bien dans l'extrait d'ailleurs, Elephant, avec l'ingénieur du son. On a parlé de l'image, on a parlé de l'écriture, des acteurs. C'est vrai que c'est quelque chose qui est très frappant dans cet extrait. Le travail de la musique comme un contrepoint à l'image. Alors évidemment, il y a d'un premier abord une seule musique dominante, c'est celle de la sonate au clair de lune, mais il y a quand même quelque chose derrière qui vient un peu parasiter cette musique. On a des sons qui sont très travaillés. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler un petit peu de ce travail qui, j'imagine, vient en fin de course, une fois que le tournage a été fait, mais qui est ce travail de son qui est primordial chez vous, qui apporte une autre signification à l'image et de la complicité peut-être aussi avec votre ingénieur son.
Well, I think, yeah, there was like a slow development in working with sound. I think originally, I mean, I've always liked working with sound. I think originally, like Drugstore Cowboy, for instance, there's always these sort of grand intentions. Dane, a guy named Dane, did the sound, the sound cutting of Drugstore Cowboy, and it was mixed at a place called JDH in LA. And there were a lot of things that were sort of by the book and standard in Hollywood. And I think that film probably had a pretty standard mix, even though we were throwing like sometimes strange things into it. I think, let's see, it wasn't until Elephant really that we were really kind of starting to play with things. It was partly because of Leslie Schatz, who was a mixer in Los Angeles that I started to use with probably to Die For. He didn't do My Own Private Idaho, but with To Die For. And when we were shooting Jerry, he suggested to the location sound recordist that he use a stereo mic. Which I didn't really, I knew what a stereo mic could do. I knew what stereo could do. I didn't really have an opinion about like recording the location voice with stereo. And there was some reason on Jerry why he was pushing Felix, my location recordist, to use a stereo mic. And they talked about it, and we never did it on Jerry. The location guy was saying the mic would be too heavy, and they would have these long talks about it, and I was kind of left out of it because it was sort of over my head. And then on Elephant, he succeeded in talking Felix into using a stereo mic and building one that wasn't heavy. And so another thing that happened by chance was we were playing back the dailies after we shot for, a couple days and got the film processed. We would play the dailies to ourselves, and there was a number of tracks. I think there was like four mix tracks, four main mix tracks. There was two for the stereo mic and two for the lavalier mics, which were on the actors. But we only had 3 tracks to play back on because of just our Portland, Oregon limitations of not having like the right equipment. So we would play the dailies back with these random 3 tracks. Sometimes they were the stereo mic, 2 stereo mics and 1 lavalier. Sometimes there were 2 lavaliers and 1 stereo mic, but they were dedicated solely to like the left, middle, and right speaker. So 1 lavalier would be on the right speaker, 1 channel from the stereo mic would be on the left speaker, and maybe another lavalier would be in the middle speaker. And they wouldn't necessarily correlate to the actors, because the actor that the sound was coming out of the left speaker might actually be on the right side of the screen, and the stereo mic. So it was sort of mixed together, and I really liked the effect. I liked the sort of these sort of mono tracks coming at you from different parts of the room. And so when we finally mixed it, we did sort of divide up the lavalier tracks as we wanted, left, right, and center. But the stereo mic added an umbrella of stereo sound. So the hallways of the school were very, very echoey, and you had this like full stereo environment. And a reason that we were able to do this partly was the really long takes. It wasn't going to be cutting back and forth, so the stereo mic could have an effect. It had time to play. And then on top of the the stereo location sound and the body mics that they were wearing and the echoey hallway, I put quite often. I was putting musique concrète from recordings that I had for a number of years, ever since trying to use some music made of sounds that had been composed, some in Canada, some in the US. And I'd always wanted to use these in a film. And so I think the first time I did was the scene that you just saw earlier, with the starting. I mean, it starts with the kids playing football, but when they go into the hallway, I'm playing a music piece, I think by Hildegard Westerkamp, and it's in a British train station, and there's like the super squeaky door that like happens to go exactly in the moment that he opens the door to go outside where the guy's breakdancing, and the train announcements and the crying baby, like when he sees the girls and walks by the girls, is all like a musical piece, but the music is made of sounds. And that's also very echoey, and it's also like very strong stereo. It's like it's really panned, like, it's using the right speaker, middle speakers, and left speaker very heavily. So altogether, it sort of produces this. Besides the stereo recording of the Beethoven piece, the Beethoven piano, it sort of created this whole world, which I was very happy about when I discovered it in the editing room, because I finally was able to make use of musique concrète.
Du coup, sur d'autres musiques, est-ce que c'est le mixeur qui vous les a apportés, ou est-ce que c'est toujours vous, par exemple, des opéras baroques, de la musique classique, de la musique pop, par exemple dans Paranoid Park, il y a une très grande richesse, il y a même aussi des extraits de Nino Rota, de Juliette des Esprits, de Fellini. Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui vient vraiment toujours que de vous, ou est-ce que c'est une discussion avec Leslie Schatz, par exemple?
Let's see. I think usually I'm the guy who's like bringing in the music. On certain films, we have a music editor. I didn't really use a music editor until later, but the Elliott Smith in Good Will Hunting or Nino Rota in Paranoid Park were all things that I'd sort of brought. I think Nino Rota in Paranoid was an idea, and I liked it a lot, and I asked Danny Elfman whether he could create a musical score that would be like Nino Rota, although Danny is at times very much like Nino Rota. And he said that like the musicians of today aren't playing in the same fashion that they did in the 50s or 60s, when the recordings that I had, the way they sounded was partly because of that period. And either he was just trying to get out of the job, which is possible, or you know, he was right. So I happened to know a man Hal Wilner, who had dealt with Nino Roto's estate, and we were able to like get permission. But yeah, that was something that I wanted to actually do new music, but I was sort of guided into using the original.
J'avais une question un peu pour terminer. Elephant a été produit par HBO, bon, qui est une chaîne de télé, mais qui commençait à s'investir à l'époque aussi dans la production de films, comme vous l'avez dit, de films un peu expérimentaux, un peu différents. Aujourd'hui, vous avez travaillé sur plusieurs séries télé, des pilotes, des épisodes, Boss, et puis une nouvelle série sur des activistes gays à San Francisco, When We Rise. Est-ce qu'il y a toujours là on a beaucoup senti toute cette liberté que vous vous donnez, est-ce qu'il y a encore cette liberté, ou est-ce qu'il y a de la liberté à la télévision aujourd'hui pour pouvoir expérimenter sur le son, le montage, le scénario? Comment vous vous sentez dans cette... alors c'est peut-être des boîtes de production différentes, peut-être on ne peut pas généraliser la télévision, mais voilà, comment vous vous retrouvez aujourd'hui dans ce nouveau monde pour lequel vous travaillez aussi?
Well, on HBO, on the first time we made anything on HBO was Elephant, and that was because we couldn't get, you know, ABC or CBS or NBC, the main television broadcasters in the States. We couldn't get them interested in doing a dramatic investigation into the Columbine massacre, because it was such a hot potato for them, because partly the TV stations themselves were being held responsible for violent TV shows, and you know they there was too much for them. But HBO, it was also a few years later as well, HBO was able to take the challenge, and also they were really interested. One of the reasons they wouldn't let me quit was I think they were really interested in getting feature directors to work there. It was 2002, 2001 when we were like really starting, or 2000 when we were really starting to talk to them, and there still hadn't been this like exodus of filmmakers into TV. There wasn't, you know, the way it is today. It's sort of grown over those years. It was the early times. But the TV shows that I have worked on, which are I think 3 now, I was not the show creator. If I was the show creator, I think I would have a lot of freedom. But I wasn't. I was always working underneath the show creator. So I was helping them, but I wasn't autonomous in my job. And I wasn't also really going into the area of sound, you know, in Boss or the pilot that I did for Genji Cohen, and the new series I'm working on, When We Rise. It's very much, you know, the showrunner's game, and I'm like a worker underneath them.
Je ne sais pas si on est bientôt arrivé à l'heure, je crois. Je ne sais pas si on a le temps ou pas pour une ou deux questions, peut-être.
Bonsoir et merci pour cette masterclass.
Bonsoir.
Vous êtes intéressé de très près, dans la majorité de votre œuvre, aux jeunes. J'aimerais bien savoir quel jeune vous étiez, vous, et dans quelle proportion votre œuvre est-elle votre reflet?
I think I'm not sure exactly what I was like when I was younger. Probably like I am now, but younger. But
je ne sais pas très bien comment j'étais quand j'étais jeune, sans doute comme maintenant, mais plus jeune.
I was an art student. The art students are usually kind of odd. I was interested in cinema then in high school. I went to a high school very much like the high school in Elephant, a big one, you know, with about 1,200 students, in a sort of upper middle class town, and I think, I mean, for me, like, there have been a lot of central characters that are young, and the films have been about their youth, and sometimes their youth in face of, you know, adverse situations. I think partly it's because it's the moment in your life where You're, I think, the most intuitive, the healthiest, the maybe the smartest. Not maybe you haven't been educated, but it's the time when you're making the rules for your, for the new days to come, for the new generation. The most perhaps inspired people are maybe people of say, from 16 to 24. But I'm not positive that's why, why the coming back to that age group. But.
Bonjour et merci pour vos merveilleux films. Je voulais savoir comment vous travaillez avec vos monteurs. Est-ce que ils sont sur le film ou est-ce que vous participez aussi au montage? Merci.
Like a few films, I've edited my own versions, or sometimes I've been the sole editor. I can be like, I think Curtis Clayton was the guy who was my first editor for 4 films. I think I had done Malinoche myself, but Curtis did Drugstore Cowboy, then My Own Private Idaho, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, and To Die For. So those 4 films, and then Pietro Scilia did Good Will Hunting. But for Curtis and I, we were always sort of, I think, the odd couple. We were always arguing. I think in the case of My Own Private Idaho, like he would do, or Drugstore Cowboy, he would try and get me out of the editing room. So he had a calm, space to himself to edit, and then I would come in later and view what he had done. And I think that it sort of prevailed in Drugstore Cowboy, My Own Private Idaho, Cowgirls. Cowgirls was actually re-edited, and Curtis wasn't available during the re-edit, so I re-edited Cowgirls. But we're going to show Curtis's version.
I think both.
Both. Okay, we're going to show both, so you can compare us. But that one, that's interesting. You're going to show both. And To Die For was a really long, arduous edit, partly because the producer, Laura Ziskin, was trying to, disallow us from changing the order of the scenes as they appeared in the screenplay. She didn't want us to mix it up because I think because of a sort of ignorance about how films are made, she thought the screenplay just needed to be intact, or why have a screenplay? And it just we kept testing it, and it kept testing the same very low score. And the studio eventually said, something has to change, and we said, well, we haven't ever tried to actually change the order of the scenes. And Curtis came up with this kind of very different order. In To Die For, it was originally a story that was told in a linear fashion, and all the characters that were being interviewed in the story told their parts of the story that applied to the linear story. The other way to go about it, and what we eventually changed it to, was we told all of the stories from one character at a time. So it started with Lydia's, I think it started with the sister, but then eventually Lydia's stories, who was the young girl, the parents' stories, and you kept going through the same story again and again. It's the same order of stories. So you didn't get lost, but it was telling it out of order, which was in some ways more natural to hear one person's side of the story, another person's side of the story. And then about 30 minutes in, Joaquin Phoenix's character told his part of the story, and he had kind of the juiciest story. So it was a much better edit, but it scored only 1 point higher in the test. And the eventuality of the film was that Rank Film in England owned part of it, and they entered it in Cannes, and Cannes sort of saved the film because it got good notices in Cannes, and then it made the studio not like just sort of forget our project.
Alors, merci Gus Van Sant pour cette
Merci,
masterclass.
thank you.
Merci.